Good evening. Good evening. My name's Gwen Borishevich. I'm one of the committee members of the Friends of Fitzwilliam. It's wonderful to see so many of you here this evening. I did wonder with the snow today whether maybe some of you wouldn't have been able to come, but we're delighted that so many have turned up. Now then, first of all, in line with health and safety issues, I need to point out the fire exits. 1, 2, and 1 over here. Could I also maybe remind you to turn your mobile phones off? So first of all, I'd like to very warmly thank the Master and the Fellows of Corpus Christi College for allowing us to use this wonderful lecture theatre this evening. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Light Blue Travel, for their support for the evening. Now, our speaker this evening, Nick Chrimes, I'm sure is well known to many of you. He graduated from Bristol University and INSEAD, and he's lived near Cambridge with his family for many years. He has had a long-established interest in art and architecture. And of course, Nick is the author of the book, Cambridge, Treasure Island in the Fens. Many of you, ourselves included, have not only found the book hugely informative and interesting, but also so well written that it's an absolute pleasure to read. Now, the book, not only is it a bestseller here, but it's also a bestseller in China. In recent years, Nick has made extended visits to China, lecturing about this university at over 20 of the top Chinese universities. And he tells me that he will continue to go east whilst he pursues his current literary ambition of writing a book on modern China. However, he maintains his interest in Cambridge, hence the talk tonight, King's College Chapel, England's oldest art gallery. Thank you. Nick?
Thank you, Gwen, for getting the slideshow going. I wanted to go one back. And thank you for joining us tonight, particularly my younger scholar friends, for whom paying actual cash for a lecture in Cambridge is very difficult. Let's go back to Europe in 1209. You had an ambitious, cunning Lazio aristocrat occupying the papal throne. And the papal power was at its zenith, never again to be so powerful. Innocent III dealt with the Cathars in France and then turns attention to King John in England. And he imposed a bishop, an Archbishop Stephen Langton, on King John. King John didn't want this and refused, and England was put under an interdict, which is like a religious deep freeze. You can have no weddings, births, burials. And it was during this period, King John there, that some people in Oxford, the townsfolk, tried and hung 2 scholars. This shouldn't have happened. The scholars throughout Europe were subject to canon law, not civil law. And the result of that was that the university shut, and the scholars fled to Paris, the leading university, Reading Abbey, which was further up the river and very rich, like our nearby abbey here of Bury, and Cambridge. Why they came to Cambridge is almost a mystery. There was no overwhelming reason. It wasn't particularly rich at that time. There were some monasteries here, and perhaps it was just coincidence because there happened to be a leading Oxford scholar who lived in this area. Cambridge, however, was absolutely nowhere compared to Oxford for the first 400 years. And you can see this conveniently through the two sets of old schools, which were the medieval equivalent of faculties. And you have the lovely ones here from Oxford, the Divinity School in the central area there, now next to the Bodleian. And Cambridge's old schools are very modest in comparison. And you can see this as well in 1415. We have the Battle of Agincourt when we defeated the French, but there was also a Council of Constance to deal with the schism that had beset the papacy when at one point there were 3 popes. Henry V, king at the time, only consulted with Oxford academics. Another example is in Wolf Hall, where she gets the detail right. She may be wrong on the larger issues of what sort of character Cromwell was, but and there's one point when she has Cromwell plant the seed of the dissolution in Henry's ears and says that the monasteries are moribund, all the learned men are university men. And she reels off Cromwell reels off half a dozen scholars of Colet and Grocyn and Wareham and Linacre, and to a man, they were all Oxford people. Cambridge really was nowhere. Then you had really the emergence through King's Chapel of Cambridge. And you may say, well, why did they start King's College here? Well, one reason is that William Wickham had already done the double. He'd founded Winchester and New College. So the Eton and King's College was appropriate to put to the other place. You had also John Wycliffe, a kind of proto-Protestant from the late 1300s, who'd left the aura of heresy over Oxford, so it wasn't quite as trusted. And you had the King Henry VI himself, who was a very religious man. This is a painting on your left here of him, and this is a piece of glass, stained glass from one of the side chapels. And it was really a natural choice for him. And also, we needed in England more clerics, educated clerics. The population was recovering from the Black Death, and up to 1500, there was a 25% increase in our population, up to about 4 million. So Cambridge in the 1440s hadn't become rich yet. The streets were as full of pigs and hens and puddles as they were people. Yet out of the swamps and the stench and the squalor arose this terrific building. And architecture, incidentally, in this period was the dominant form of art. The building put Cambridge on the map, having been and also ran up to the 1500s. By the third quarter, men from Cambridge were running the country. You had Gresham running finance, as Gresham Street, still in the centre of the city. He was at Gonville and Caius College. You had William Cecil running the government from St John's. You had Archbishop Parker from this college, and you had Caius, again, running the liberal arts and medicine from Gonville and Caius College. And the investment in King's Chapel pulled in the monarchs all the way through to Henry VIII, and there were 5 monarchs in between, from Henry VI to Henry VIII. It's interesting in engineering terms how we moved really from St Benet's and its tower from the mid-11th century to the great building that is King's Chapel. And it's interesting that in this period from 1100 to 1500, there were over 90 cathedral-like buildings put up in northern Europe. Started with the Basilica of Saint Denis in the early 1100s, and this building here was number 82. And there had been a huge increase in engineering skill that enabled us to move from buildings with only tiny windows, those 2 round ones at the top, into the vast expanse that you can get within the King's Chapel. And the background to Christian art didn't really include stained glass. Imagery was banned for some centuries, and the early buildings you can see here, from the Serbian church to the 14th century, 12th century French church at a similar time of our own Leopard's Chapel, there are no windows, virtually no windows. And the art was down here. You can see mosaics and tesserae that were used to decorate the floors or ceilings. And in the 1500s as well, look at the outside of Sistine Chapel, not a regular, familiar building. Look at the Duomo in Florence, hardly any windows. And inside those buildings, the Sistine Chapel, the emphasis was obviously going to be on the ceiling and on the walls. And it's the same in the Duomo as well. And because the heart of Christianity is in hot places, again, you didn't really want these big windows. Here in wet and cold North Europe, we needed as much light as possible. And this was helped by the engineering kind of feat of moving from the three-pointed Gothic arch, typical of decorated Gothic architecture, onto the four-pointed arch. And this led to the ability to have massive glass areas to be filled and decorated. And in fact, with this four-centered arch, you can have a window that is wider than it is high. In fact, this is in just half the east window in our chapel, and you have magnificent views like this as a result. Just want to mention as well some of the significance of King's Chapel. This red road was one of the three main roads in medieval Cambridge, the others being the Roman Road, what's now called King's Parade, and this was Milne Street, running from the docks, the King's dock, which is dominated by Scudamores these days, up to the mills at Chesterton. And King's Chapel resulted in this being removed. They just plonked it over a main artery of the town. And you can see the hashed area here, what I've put in, which shows you the space that the King's College occupied. And this is a more modern picture here, which you'll see. So as a result of this foundation of the college, it demonstrated how the town was very much under the thumb and control of the university. It also showed the power or wealth of King's College compared to the other colleges, because in the space which I put an arrow in, if you can see, between what is Old Schools and King's Chapel, on the sward of grass, King's started and completed another chapel that was complete and used by kings when they visited Cambridge and fell down in the 1530s. That must have been started in the early 1440s, and the chapel itself later in the same decade. And meanwhile, this relatively poor college had to worship for 200 years in St. Benet's. It was known not as Corpus Christi, but as Benet College. You have Trinity Hall College, just a couple of yards down the road. They have a tiny college, college chapel in comparison, and you could fit it 100 times, I should think, into the volume of King's Chapel. The third reason that it's significant is that it was the last building, significant building of religion until the mid-19th century. And this is a picture of Manchester Cathedral, because we went immediately into religious wars in the 1500s and the 1600s, and then we were fighting the French throughout the globe. And the wealth and population growth of the 19th century restarted the tradition of church building. And I just wanted to put here since the town coat of arms was here, put the university coat of arms. They were both drawn up, incidentally, in the 1570s. And I think the interesting thing is that neither of them refer to the other. If you look at the town, they both swear loyalty. They each, both of them, swear loyalty to the royal family through these various motifs, but ignore each other. And that's very different to the next phase of university buildings, the red brick universities, which were really founded and run by the local businessmen. And it's a great contrast, I think, actually. So what I've tried in this introduction is show you England 1209, the early days of Cambridge, and the chapel construction. And for the next 40 minutes, I want to talk about the window scheme and its controllers, typology, which is behind the window layout, the scheme, talk about survival in the glass, and particularly what I've called the other layers, which you can see of Tudor vanity, prejudices, and art. The objectives, then, is to place the chapel in the context of our history, but also to expose the inspiration behind the glass paintings and share with you how it explains so much about our social, political, and art history. The scheme of the glass was based on scholasticism, which is kind of parodied as the determining how many kind of angels can dance on the head of a pin. And really the philosophy was to articulate the dogma of canon law. And this was the basis of the scheme that started out. But in fact, it was replaced almost immediately by humanism, which had man at the centre, capable of rational thought and capable of determining their own destiny. And it employed new art techniques such as perspective and naturalism, realism to do this. And it just occurred to me that one of our greatest paintings at the Fits does just this, the Titian and the scene of Tarquin, the son of the king of Rome, also called Tarquin, and Lucretia. And he's about to rape her, and she later commits suicide as a result. But here's a man who has chosen badly, and this is bathed in the philosophy of humanism, and this was done towards the end of the 1500s. The window scheme itself, you can see how it was arranged just in kind of plan form. You have the blue bits in the middle, which are known as messenger windows, which I'll leave behind. And then you have four scenes. And the top half, 1 and 3, are based on the Old Testament, and 2 and 4 on the New Testament. And the New Testament scenes in the bottom are actually chronologically correct. They record the life of Mary and Jesus. And the top ones, which are known as types, try to record the equivalent of those scenes in the Old Testament, and they are not quite so chronologically correct. But it's a very awkward surface for an artist to paint on. It's not a nice little bit of canvas. It's very elongated. It's got a shocking great big mullion up the middle. You see the black one here, which they have to kind of put work across. And they have iron bars going horizontally. So it's a very difficult, I think, circumstance for these great artists to do their painting. The controllers of the scheme don't think that it was just anyone, the local artist or even the college provost generally, who could determine what was painted. And the number one chap was Richard Fox. You see his dates here. And he had been in exile with Henry VII and returned when Henry VII won the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 and became the right-hand man, the Chancellor of the country. And he determined the main themes of the windows. But there were others, a chap called Harcomblin, I'm not sure I've pronounced it correctly, who was provost for 20 years at a critical time, and others like Edward Fox, provost later on, Thomas Cranmer, you see in the bottom right, and Cardinal Wolsey. And they were all closely involved. And I would say Harcomblin was particularly important, and later on Bishop Day as well, but I'll come back to him. And there's a letter from the archives from the fellows to Cardinal Wolsey, and he says here, what zeal, what encouragement you send to our serene king to complete and embellish our college. So you can see that they're concerned and writing to the very top people in the country. And this serene king at the time was painted like this, the second most familiar painting of Henry VIII after the Holbein. And it's by Van Clever, C-L-E-V-E, and the Fits actually has a lovely painting of his as well. So moving on from the window scheme and its controllers, want to now move on to typology and the survival of the glass. Typology was a form of art that was very popular. It goes back right to the beginning of Christianity. I think some of the grottos of Rome, you can see it as well. And basically it shows a type and an antitype. And the type here is God feeding manna to the fleeing Israelites, and here we have Jesus feeding his disciples at the Last Supper. And the sources for these books were twofold. First of all, the Mirror for Human Salvation, and also the Pauper's Bible. And they were standardized in the 1200s as a way of communicating the Bible stories to the generally illiterate population. These two were used as a standard because people were doing their own pictures, and apparently there were some kind of disgusting, irrelevant pictures drawn of the Bible. So this was an effort to get it right. And you can see the equivalent in our chapel with manna from heaven coming down here, feeding the fleeing Israelites. And over here, you have a scene, which I'll come back to, of the Last Supper. You have another one of Elisha. I always had trouble coming to Cambridge about determining who was Elisha and who was Elijah. Elijah's the chap at the bottom. Elisha has ascended, and Elijah is worried how he's going to cope. And you have the picture there, which I use in the publicity, of Jesus ascending and the disciples aghast of how they're going to cope as well. So that is the typology. The fact that we have the glass still here is also remarkable. And gone too far. And it's really, this is where we owe a debt to Bishop Day. He was provost, you can see from 1538 for some time, and he was against the spread of Protestant revolution. And this is at a time when Bishop Goodrich, who is a Corpus graduate, I don't know how much he's praised or revered, because he was Bishop of Ely at the time and instructed his priests and supporters to destroy all the glass at Ely. And in fact, he ended up locking up Bishop Day during the reign of Catholic Mary. He was therefore both an iconoclast against all these images and also someone who was able to accept the Catholic Mary later on. So it's probably down today, when the glass was being completed, that that our glass, new as it was, wasn't destroyed. The next threat came from William Dowsing, who's referred to at the time apparently as Basher Dowsing. And it's not something we can hang round Cromwell's neck. It's actually the Earl of Manchester who was keen on these images of saints and what have you being destroyed. And he went around conveniently recording exactly what he did. And for each visit, by the way, he charged a noble that apparently at the time was worth 6 and 8. And at Little St Mary's, he records we break down 60 superstitious pictures, indented obnoxious images. That's indented means kind of bashing off the noses and what have you of faces. And he was also particularly against angels, winged angels like this. So we're lucky that in the 15th century aisle attached to the round church that he didn't spot them, because there are a dozen or so of the angels there. And he came to King's Chapel, December the 26th, 1643, and referred to 1,000 superstitious pictures, the ladder of Christ, and thieves to go upon, many crosses, and Jesus written. And the fellowship defied him and said, we're not part of your Ely diocese, we're a peculiar private church, and he went off and didn't come back. And thinking of iconoclasts made me think of one of the pictures or statues that's been acquired recently through the Friends' money, and all the subs go to buy acquisitions. And I was just thinking that this would have given absolute apoplexy to people like Manchester and Dowsing, which has just been placed in the museum. The next threat was the Second World War, and this is a picture of Coventry Cathedral. Happily, our church, or Cambridge, was very, very lightly bombed only. The glass was removed. Some wag at the time said it did beg the question of what you do with the glass if the building had been bombed. The glass was stored throughout Cambridge, some under the Fellows Building, some in Fellows' private houses. And it was paid for by the Berkeley College of Yale University. And one of them, rather at arm's length, I think, talking about, not their own dark days. I like the idea of this gesture of friendship to pay for the removal. to them in their dark days. And it's developed into quite a difficult situation because the Americans, about 25, 30 of them, thought they were making a loan, and kings thought they were receiving a gift. And there's an hilarious correspondence between Milner White, the renowned dean, and Maynard Keynes. There are all sorts of college issues that hadn't been followed. And at the end of the war, in the 50s, I suppose, an Erasmus window was made and sent out to Yale, but it's missing. And we don't know what happened. And I'm working on a kind of monograph with a friend at Yale to see what's happened to this thing. And it's actually quite fun. The final threat, of course, is time to the glass. There was one slight diversion, really, with the mistake and error that happened with the restoration. You see on the right here, Mary at the Annunciation scene, where the arrow is, and I've blown it up for the optically challenged, you can see here. And this is a young mum about to be pregnant, and here you have Mary 9 months later. That is not the tribulations of pregnancy in biblical times. They made a mistake. But you would never do that today. I mean, that is restoration with with capital letters. They would conserve it, and they would kind of blank out her face and put a kind of note on the side saying, we've dealt with him. But what I want to move on to now is the main bit of the talk, which is about the glass. And I want to start with the tracery and use that to help show you that the chapel is, on one level, a kind of monument to Tudor vanity and insecurity. And these are various, I'm going to show you various things in the tracery, which is the stonework at the top, and I hadn't realised till I got this slide, that it has its own language, doesn't it? Mouchettes and daggers and hood moles and so on. And in that tracery area around the chapel, someone has counted that there are 94 Lancastrian roses and 70 hawthorn trees and what have you, and 53 portcullises, all symbols of the Tudor monarchy. And I remember all that guff at school about the Tudor rose was a kind of thing of conciliation. We're all a happy country after, not long after Bosworth. But there are only 13 of those, 94 of the Lancastrian, which just makes you think. And to move on from that, this is a window just above the north door, possibly the oldest one in the chapel, showing the marriage of Sarah and Tobias, the parents of Mary. And I've blown up the faces there, and you see here, watch George Scharf. Sir George Scharf was a very eminent latter 1800 art critic, and he was convinced that this was a portrait of Elizabeth of York, the sister of the two twins murdered in the Tower, and wife of Henry VII, and this is Henry VII. Hilary Waymont was not so sure, referred to the priest, incidentally, as a clumsy restoration. You can see it's been drawn on, actually. And Sarah as having little individuality. But Scharf was convinced at the time. In one of the very few, I think there are only two that I know of, coloured pieces in the chapel at on the west wall, you have another picture, which is supposed to be Elizabeth of York. She, incidentally, is on old-fashioned playing cards, is the figure that we used to see on for the Queen in the cards there. So you've got a king and queen there. You've got Henry VI in one of the side chapels. As we know, the Tudors didn't refer to themselves as Tudors. They wanted to stress their Lancastrian origins, so they'd have been keen on having a picture of Henry VI, who was kind of a half-uncle of Henry VII. And you have Henry VIII here. You see where the arrow is? This is a face which I've blown up. This is the scene, again, I'll come back to, of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba here, but he was paying for the picture with money stolen from the monasteries, but paying nonetheless, so he thought he'd have his own face there. It's a kind of charming picture of bluff King Hal, but I'll show you some other ones that don't show him in such a nice light in a moment. Then you've got an interesting one here up. This is the East End window, picture A. You've got a scene here showing the crowning of Solomon by Bathsheba. And in fact, it's supposed to be Lady Margaret Beaufort, the mother of Henry VII, who survived 6 months into 1509 in time to go to the coronation and crown Henry VIII. And in fact, that's a twisting of the Bible facts, because it's our friend Zadok the priest who crowned Solomon. So you've got the Tudors here putting in their spin at the expense of Bible accuracy in this case. And there's another one, I'm not too sure of the significance, but this is opposite at the end, picture B. And you see here Mary about to ascend to heaven, being crowned by Jesus. It is diametrically opposite, but I'm not sure if there's any Tudor significance in that. You can see the figures there. In continuing this theme of a portrait gallery for Tudor kings, in the east window above the red dragon of the Tudors, there's a row of initials. Off picture, you've got an H for Henry VIII, and then K for Catherine Howard, Henry VII, and then E for Elizabeth of York further there. And it always amused me, Catherine Howard was only around for about 18 months, and I just imagine the worker who's just finished his job on this big window, getting down the ladder and being told, nudged in the ribs, that, she's gone. But you see so much of this. There are other examples. You've got this in the side chapel here, rather unclear, so I've given you another one, symbol of Catherine Parr, the wife number 6. Then you've got on the screen in wood, but I so like it that I wanted to share it with you, the initials of Henry. And you see on the right an R for Rex, and then an H going across. Can you see an H going across for Henricus, and then an A for Anne, and an S for sponsor? I mean, it's charmingly carved. And they were very rare, in fact, as well, because naturally enough, Henry sent in the refurbishment team as he moved through his wives. And wife number 2, Anne, it was the last wife he had his initials entwined with those of himself. So presumably refurbishment for the last 4 was kind of cheaper. I noticed in the press, I know there are some tennis players here tonight, Andy Murray's moniker is not so impressive. And that made me look at Roger Federer's. And it is typically more graceful and rather nice, but I still think this original from is really outstanding. So I'm referring to it as the PR zone for the Tudor dynasty. You've got portraits and references to 3 kings and a queen, and then 3 of Henry VIII's helpings afterwards with their various kind of monikers. And I found one the other day in the east window, top left-hand side, so it's scene 4, third panel, where an artist has given a kind of a love knot. And this is something I spotted from Hilary Waymond. And there's an H there, and I can't see the rest. It's difficult to see with the naked eye, but you can see the H, I hope. You can see an H kind of there. So it's just full of this. Now, moving on to prejudices and fashions, headdresses. The fashionable young ladies amongst you would have been wearing this in the 1520s, the gable headdress. But by 1530, you'd have moved on to the round dress, the round headdress. And the earlier one, the gable, is Spanish, and that was a picture of Catherine of Aragon. And this is Anne Boleyn. She'd been educated in France and came across with that cultural background. And just for reference, you had the widow's peak of Mary Queen of Scots afterwards. And here in this window, you see again, it's not very clear, but I'll blow it up for you here, the house, the headwear, the headdress. She is wearing the Spanish style. So you can see from the chapel glass the kind of movements in political events outside. And the timing, the window is about 1531, and Henry was chasing Anne Boleyn from about 1528. So it all fits. And again, the detail for Wolf Hall is pretty good, and you can see Anne Boleyn here, and Catherine of Aragon there with the different headdresses. Elsewhere, you can see little events. You can see this circumcision scene, and you see the glasses on the nose of the good doctor, and I've blown it up for you here. The use of convex lenses is quite old, apparently, but shaped glasses didn't come in until the late 1300s. 1800s. So apparently the Chinese were using them earlier as sunglasses. They used sunglasses, which was, I suppose, to be an inscrutable Eastern character. Sunglasses helped. And there is a picture I stumbled across, actually, by Tommaso de Modena in 1350s with glasses on. But in a biblical scene, this is, it's inappropriate. Though there is a picture by Murillo in the Spanish gallery at the Fitzwilliam of John the Baptist, and that has shocking great big glasses on as well, actually. So you've got a more on Tudor life and fashion. When we were at school learning about the shepherd boy David, who was cutting off the head of Goliath, he was a relatively poor figure, wasn't he? He's dressed as a prince, Renaissance prince. Similarly, the carpenter's wife, Mary. So you're seeing how people dressed, how people behaved in the glass, which I think is just lovely to see it. Another example is the Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520. Great jamboree organised by the Tudors, and it was pretty unsuccessful. I'd forgotten, but by 1522 we were at war with France, but it was a huge thing that most of us, I think, remember learning about at school. And Henry VIII set out from Dover in this ship, which is Henri Grâce à Dieu, which is blown up for you here, and more famous at the time than the Mary Rose, just we haven't found it. And he was rowed out from Dover on a little skiff, and this was an event that people would have recognised and seen on the south side of our chapel. And it was actually a copy of a scene by Johannes Corvus that was in Whitehall Palace. And Whitehall Palace burnt down twice in the 1690s, and we lost both that wall piece and also the original Holbein, in fact. So we're left with the Emsworth one at Trinity. And since it was burnt down, I couldn't resist giving you this slide. It burnt down twice, but I won't go back to it. And it was also copied, the same scene, at Hampton Court, and this is on permanent display. It came after our glass, in fact. And you see the same sort of scene, Henry being rowed out here to his warship. It's also been recorded on the Anthony Roll, because this is the first inventory of our country's ships. And there's a copy, there are very few copies, and there's one copy at the Magdalen Library, Magdalen College Library here, which I thought would have made a great visit for the Friends if they can get it out and you can see all these things. So you're seeing life and clothes and events like Field of the Cloth of Gold being exposed. You can also see Renaissance architecture. This is a very much admired building, San Pietro de Montorio, by the leading Renaissance architect in Rome at the time, employed by Julius II. And it's built on top of where Peter is supposed to have died. So what have we in the glass on the north side? A direct copy, you can see here. And we, of course, had our own round church. I don't know if that influenced it. And this brings me on to another point about the architecture, is that you'd expect the buildings, the public buildings they showed in the glass would be Gothic in part. But there are very few Gothic buildings. There are some kind of domestic buildings you see here, and look again at the detail of this woman doing the dishes or something, and a kind of contemporary house, or else they're classical, and they're not this sort of building, which is I think it's Brussels Town Hall or Salisbury Cathedral. They're not Gothic at the time, which I find interesting. You also see in the glass loads of prejudices, particularly against Jews, against women, and above all against Catholics. And against the Jews, you'll see that all the Jews are shown in a rather bad light, rather ugly, taunting Jesus there. I've blown them up for you. You've got Caiaphas, who doesn't look actually quite so bad in that picture, but look at this other chap taunting Christ. And that is true throughout. You've got anti-women prejudices. Have you noticed before that the devil here is a woman? I'm sure most of you liberal young ladies would sex the devil as a male, but not in misogynist Cambridge. And I've blown her up for you here. And the other interesting thing is, She doesn't look like a devil. There's very little of the devil about her. It's a good-looking woman. And that was another message, that women were dangerous, particularly for these young scholars, most of whom were destined for the celibate priesthood. A devil, I like to think, standing next to me, classic example of Dürer, you would see who the good guy was and who the bad guy was. You couldn't do this with women. And this was the message. Despite this, women, I kind of throw this in because you can see it in the glass, were educated, given the right social position. Because you see Mary here as well, reading a book. You see another delightful piece of glass that is German from the 1470s and was only put in the side chapel in the late 1970s. But she's reading and writing and has books and things. It was, provided you had the right social background, you could be educated, and we know about Margaret More and the cleverness of Elizabeth and the First and others, but it was the mixing of the sexes which was the problem. Have some fun with prejudices against Catholics. I like going around the chapel with Catholics and Jews. Here you've got Henry VIII masquerading as King Solomon here, and the Queen of Sheba. Queen of Sheba would have represented the ancient regime of Aden, which was now paying homage to the plucky young new regime of Judea. And this would have been a message that I think would have most people would have picked up. You've got another aspect here. Early Protestants carried a sword. The word of God did have a harsh, judgmental aspect to it, and David has cut off the head of Goliath, representing perhaps the old Catholic regime as well. And you have a wonderful one here with the high priest, another Jew, Caiaphas. These are the horrible Jews here, and Jesus up before him. And in this block down here, you see some Latin, and Caiaphas is horrified when Jesus has said, I am the Son of God, and says, is that in Latin, is that how you reply to a priest? And the word for priest and pope in Latin is the same. So this was, in fact, Henry replying to Pope Clement in that way. Very determined piece of anti-Catholicism. And I do love the dogs as well. Look at the detail there. And this brings me on to a little digression, if you'll permit me. With this Latin is broken up, you see there, into 3 words, sic respondis pontificem, and you're now going to learn about macrons, if you didn't know already, because it's a form of shorthand. You see that the O, with the kind of almost an umlaut above it, replaced an N or an M. So it should have been responde, so there's an M missing there, and a pontificem, an N missing there, and at the end, with the E, there was an M, pontificem, which is one of my clever Latin-speaking friends told me, well, that's accusative, pontificem, you see down here. And if that's how you reply to a priest, even I can remember the dative in Latin is pontifici. And whether that's a mistake, I don't know. They might have had the same casual attitude to spelling that we in English had well up to the 18th century, but I prefer to think that this place of generally clever people have got it wrong. We don't know. I'm now going to give you more Catholic prejudices. You have here the temptation scene, and you have the devil, you girls are pleased to see, in male form, but as a priest. Look at his horn. It's a friar, and he's got cloven feet and horns coming out of his head. And this was quite a kind of common way of displaying things in this period. And there's a pardoner's tale, or summoner's tale rather, where you have this wonderful thing where the friar is kind of treated badly, and there is no horse drawing a cart that might have let a fart of such a sound. So friars were typically mocked, but it's certainly being mocked here. There's a prejudice against beards, you can see, because beards were a serious allegorical matter, and I learned recently at the Council of Aachen, the Pope issued an edict that monks and priests must shave every 15 days. So Catholic clergy were generally beardless. And I went round looking again at some of them, and you'll see that the baddies generally are clean-shaven. This is the soldier at the foot of Christ's cloth, gambling. These are the two chaps mocking Christ, clean-shaven. Caiaphas is, and this is a soldier who's massacring children in another scene. And generally, the bearded ones are goodies. I just think it's rather amusing, that. And that brought me on to notice the custodians of the chapel. Many of them are bearded. And I don't know whether, I'm thinking of starting a rumour that the previous provost perhaps made a condition of employment. And again, thinking of beards made me think of the wonderful bearded picture we have at the Fits by Rubens. You hear, absolutely gorgeous. And I blocked it off like that because it's probably what's known as a trongy, a practice for a bigger picture, and that when he died, his young wife had to raise money and probably had someone extend it here, but not sure about that. The glass is also used to promote new learning against Catholic doctrine. And you can see here, am I going the right way? Where am I? No, I've gone way wrong. Excuse me. Technical. There we are. And you can see here the good thief on the right, appealing for forgiveness right at the end of his life, direct to Jesus. And this is a sort of Protestant message. And I also like to notice that Henry's symbol, the Welsh dragon of the ancient British family, is right above Jesus' head. So whatever happens afterwards, as far as here on earth, the secular authorities are going to win. If you move down to these three windows, 1, 2, 3, done in the mid-1540s, they are all New Testament. The New Testament was more important to Protestants. And so that's top and bottom, 4 scenes per window. And they are all about Protestant-type things, teaching, learning, healing. And Paul features in 8 of them, and Team Peter only in 4. And Peter, of course, was the more important Catholic saint. Paul converted directly by the thunderbolt from the heavens, the analogy to Protestantism. And picking that analogy, or that thing about Paul taking it on, you can see here the thunderbolt, which I'll blow up in a minute for you. And beneath you see the horse, and then Paul is struck off and falls from his horse. And you have over on the other side, here, Paul going out to evangelize, setting out in his boat. This is the scene that doubles for the field of the cloth of gold. So these are all Protestant things. I just wanted to build up that bit of the painting there to show you some of the detail that you really can't see with the naked eye. But isn't it fantastic? A kind of gloomy sky, almost kind of, I don't know about Cambridge 1515, Cambridge 2015, and this detail of these people. And it's very difficult to see, but the skill is fantastic. And the west window was never decorated until the 1880s, known as the Stacey window. Insultingly, it was not pulled out during the Second World War. The probable reason why it was left out is that it was so contentious to deal with purgatory by the end of the 1540s. We were oscillating from one religion to another. There was no certainty. And again, Mantle produces a comment, best taught with Cranmer to determine the king's latest thinking on purgatory. So the brave or not so brave fellowship this time left it blank. To talk about the High Renaissance now, there are various exhibitions in London, Buckingham Palace, and books and the rest of it. But I think really we have our permanent exhibition within King's Chapel. But I just want to start with you from the earlier Renaissance. And this is a picture by Martin Simone from the late 1300s. And it shows you where we came from. Of course, it's seen also in totally the wrong context in Fitzwilliam and in every museum, they're very well lit. These should be in darkened chapels, lit only by candles, and you would have almost a kind of extremely emotional experience. But look how there isn't any background, there's no life in it. And in fact, they're all pretty miserable. I mean, look at St. Augustine with his mouth turned down, that focused stare of St. Michael there, and St. Gimignanus here, it's pretty miserable. Look at him looking down. And we move from there to this sort of picture in just after the crucifixion, when you have the emotion and humanity, typical of humanism, but also typical of our glass. And look at there, the emotion within Mary's face, just on the window on the south side of the end of the great window. And just remind you here again of St. Michael. And actually, I noticed only the other day, look how miserable and pessimistic he is. The scales, the good side, are weighed, are not weighing as much as the bad side. So he's not only looking severe, he's telling you haven't got much hope of getting into heaven either. The realism, the picture on the carpenter who's nailing, of the face on the left here, nailing Christ to the cross, Queen of Sheba, but their face, there's humanity there, and there's certainly humanity in this one as well. And the detail, can you see this now, with the basket of tools, again, Christ nailing to the mast? I mean, I got a tool like that at home. The detail is just incredible. And the rope, you see. And another example, you've got the posh sponge from the Aegean here, that's been used to wipe down the blood from Christ's hung body. You see the detail. Another one from the Last Supper I'll come back to, which show, look at the rippling in the water and that detail. And you can be sure that this cheerleader for the No Fun Brigade didn't specify what was happening in these corners, this detail. This was the individual painters. And there's a lovely example of Christ being tempted in the desert, and if you look at the red star first, you can see the spider at the top left. You can see either side of the other coloured blue arrow star a rabbit, and then a cat. Can you see those there? It's just wonderful. I mean, obviously, it's the artist doing what he wanted. And then one of my favourites, little hedgehog in the bottom corner, which I love. And then further on, you've got, in the side chapel, you've got the St. Kings, you've got windmills, you've got birds, and again, some lovely ones of ducks. These are the ducks beneath John the Baptist, when he's baptizing Christ. You have another one I'm fond of here. There's a little duck here. I'll blur it up for you, I hope. Yeah, little duck there. And in this same scene, just above the duck, on top, you've got the neck of a swan. I managed to blow it up, but merely made it look like Nessie from Loch Ness, I think. But again, this sort of detail, which I think is terrific. And this wasn't directed by the Tudor dictatorship. This was the artists doing their thing, which I think is lovely. You see it there. You can see perspective. If you look at this copy of Leonardo's Last Supper, it's lateral, and our artists here were doing the same scene. I've just put a box around Jesus and Judas there, and you see a hand. You see the difficulty of the mullion. Jesus' hand has just come out there and is feeding Judas, though I'm told that's a contentious issue. Perhaps it didn't really happen. But you can see the challenge of perspective. And this is possibly the first time the Last Supper was done in this manner. And the one I found next was Titian in the late 1500s doing a similar one there. You have also narrative art, and I've put a wonderful one from our Fitz Museum here of Jacopo Solaio, mid-1400s, telling the scene of Psyche and Cupid, which is just terrific. And he was trained with Fra Lipolo Lippi, which is why I've put it there. And you have our east window where you see narrative, sorry, let's go back, narrative narrative art with 6 scenes going like this in the Z shape. Now, you've seen here nature, a horror of vacui, a horror of empty space. That's why you're having all these ducks and things, I think. Broader subject matter, realism, and they were showing life as it was, spiritual ugliness. This one is trotted out. I put his name here for you because I can never pronounce it, Reimersweiler, which is trotted out actually when you're on a bash the banker mission. It looks, the ugliness of sometimes money making there, and the domestic order of Van Eyck, and then this hair from Dürer, and compare this again briefly with the South, and even here with Leonardo, there's less detail. It's far simpler, and kind of posing like this contrapposto technique of David. It's all very different to the Northern Renaissance. So, in this last section, you have the inspiration now for this art coming from the continent, and there is no cause for really narrow English chauvinism in our chapel. No cause for ukippery. You can see the pan-European Catholic Church. This is what determined the building in the first place, and the glass artists were 6 out of 8 were from the Low Countries or Germany. You had German stone carvers. You had possibly French or Italians doing the screen. You had the stone for the internal decoration coming from Caen in Normandy. And Weymouth even suggests that window 2 was possibly painted overseas. And really, we were considered and often acted like a distant island of uncultured heathens. And the artists, which I'll just run through with you now, some are better known than others, obviously, but these are the ones whose work is directly related within the chapel. I'll start with one, Van Geerten, who's less well known, but he died aged 28 and would have been, a terrific chap, apparently, if he'd stayed on. And he was Dutch from Haarlem. And the scene I'm pointing to in the arrow is this one with the hand of the Jewish shoulder. And incidentally, those 2 dice, if you see them really blown up, show you 3 and 1 for the Holy Trinity, and a copy of the same arm from a sketch about St. John, a painting about John the Baptist. You've got Peter van Aalst. There are lots of Van Aalst, but this is the one that did translated the tapestries from Raphael's cartoons. I just want to look at this painting with you for a moment. You see the kind of the vanishing points all there, putting a halo over Christ's head. You've got the very classical dimensions of the building. You've got the buns and the bread rolls here, all regimented in order, evenly spaced. You've got the feet, if you can see them, almost the same. And you've got just about everybody, save the last 3, looking towards Christ. And now compare this with this picture by Van Aalst. It's kind of chaotic. There are 14 people in the scene, this chap coming along. There's a bench about to be knocked over, a bowl of something or other, fruit up here. It's totally different. Christ, and they're all looking all over the place. They're not just looking at Christ. And there's less of a halo impact, and indeed detail behind, which there wasn't in the other drawing. And now look at this glass of the Last Supper. Can you see, I think I've highlighted it here, can you see the chair from Van Aalst is knocked over, just as it is here? The little extra kind of bowls and things here. It's very much inspired, and it's all chaotic, very much inspired by this wonderful artist, Van Aalst. And it's the detail as well that is the Northern Renaissance style. This is a bit less clear, but it is, well, they're not sure, it's either Van Aalst or Roger van der Weyden. And what I'm trying to show is in this red box, the head of Goliath. We'll get rid of that, I hope. On top of a sword, in the same way as you have here. I've laboured this one a bit. You can see the full Dürer picture there, and the full picture here, the red arrow now showing you the feet, very much from Dürer's small Passion. Inspiration from the continent. Michelangelo. In the middle here, you have the Garden of Eden scene, which I've extracted and turned around for you. And I would suggest, it's not me, I'm repeating suggestions of other people, that the posture of the devil wrapped round the tree, notice it's female as well, though Michelangelo did have the decency to include Adam in his scene. We haven't, we just got Eve. And you see her wrapped round here as well. And there are other interesting things here, because you have Lucas Cranach doing another one here, female, quite a pretty female place. And then the detail here, apples, quite unusual in a scene of Eden. And actually, we have the same in our window, and I've tried to point them out. There are apples here and you know, superfluous swans and things as well. It's a very different approach. And I was trying to think of a connection with all these artists to our Fitzwilliam. But of course, Michelangelo, we now have our own connection. I don't know for how long, And it's rather like the two bronzes cheering, isn't it, for with the lovely Victoria. Holbein, I've mentioned this. You see Henry VIII, and a year or two before, Holbein was over here trying to kind of get employment from the king, and this is a woodcut, the original of which is in the Queen's collection. But look how unpleasant a man he looks. It did the job for him, because he became the king's painter until the fall of Cromwell. Then he lost out. But how unpleasant that looks. And I do compare it to, put it up there, to one I love at the Ghiberti doors at the baptistry opposite the Florence Duomo. And again, I'll blur it up, I hope. And look how decent that Solomon looks, on a quality, a decent man, compared to Henry VIII. Back to the Field of the Cloth of Gold. The artist, actually, on this one, this is Whitehall again, was Johannes Corvus. Johannes Corvus painted our friend Fox, and also did the War Memorial in there, and that's the Hampton Court anonymous artist. You have now the Sistine Chapel, Raphael, when they sent their half-dozen tapestries across to us for the Pope's visit 4 years ago. Healing of the Lame Man was one, and not a very well-focused slide you've got extended there, and that was, you see by the star, the lame man there. And these were known about, because they were cartoons drawn in Italy, but sent north to Brussels for the sewing by Van Als. And the copies were done in tapestry form for Henry VIII, again, which were burnt down, actually, with Whitehall Palace. And you've got, and that's the lame man blown up there. And you've also got the death of Ananias, another Raphael cartoon. It's rather harsh, the early church. He didn't share his money out properly, so he and his wife, Sapphira, I think, were struck down dead. But in the same way here, you can see where the star is. You've got Van Eyck in the next one, with this Arnolfini portrait. Look at the similarities between them, because you've got it with their hands. They both look pregnant. They both, the Sarah and the dress here looks as though it's they've got the same flowing form, and it's evident that it's been inspired by that painting. I've just drawn attention to the feet, and the feet's another thing, because I actually wanted to show you the blown up tiles, and these are what's known as encaustic tiles, where the print lasts long, and they're very similar, for example, to the ones at Jesus Chapel. Unfortunately, not quite the same style, the same design, but similar colour you can see. So it's attention to detail again as well. Inspiration from the continent. This Christ's body, very much taken from Jura here, and you can see a blow-up, see Christ on. And this is almost the kind of tortured language of the, in this case, I think more the Southern Renaissance. You see the body there and the shape. You see there in the full form. And I want to show another one. There's Annunciation tapestry in Reims Cathedral. If I blow it up, you see Mary seated, turning in just the same way as Mary is here. If you can see that as well, the same gestures. Raphael and Jura again, Christ in the garden. This is one of Margaret's favourites, I think. You've got a socking great big spade, you see, and Raphael and Jura both did prints that were very similar. Can you see there, Raphael on the right, very big, and almost similar position too as Mary Magdalene. Inspiration from the continent. I rather like this. It's got a dog there as well, and you've got a dog here. I'm not sure how many other. There's a slightly different portrayal then, but again, it's a drawer. There's a Roger van der Leyden as the next one. He did this. He was commissioned by the Guild of Archers, so he had Christ shaped like an arrow. You see from the red there, and actually, it's very similar to Christ over here when he's been taken down from the cross. You've got Mattis, who's not the best known, but you might know this one at the National Gallery, the Ugly Duchess. Rather nice. And if I get rid of her for the moment, then you can see Mattis did another altarpiece, and the position of Christ, agony in the garden, is very similar. And I rather like the kind of skydiving angel there, rather better than that one. And you can also see in another picture of Jura, you see the sleeping Peter resting his arm, just the same as you can down here. Absolutely identical spot there. And we have, only thing we have of Mattis at the gallery is a medal, I think. There's a agony in the garden, the murder of the innocents, slaying of the innocents. There is again a similarity between the structure of this picture. I couldn't find Van Orley's original, and the position of the mother protecting her child there. But we do have a wonderful Van Orley at the Fitzwilliam. We have now, just to remind you, these are the signatures of the 8 key people of the glass scheme. 6 out of 8 are foreign, which is just amazing, I think. It's not very much an English project. So you can see all these artists. It was a very progressive form of art for the time. It shows you far more than a portrayal of the Bible stories. It shows you the fashion. It shows you the prejudices against women, against Jews, a bit of Renaissance architecture as well, and the usurpers' insecurities. The imprint of the new Renaissance, the Northern Renaissance, with expressiveness, Mary again here, the sponge, the interest in nature with the hedgehog. Is it coming up? And what I'd now like to quickly to end and draw a couple of conclusions is what does all this tell us? And I think, first of all, stained glass is an important democratic art form. It was visible. The 2 other major art forms prior to here were illuminated manuscripts and tapestries, which weren't seen very widely. Even at kings, and certainly at cathedrals, these weren't really much more widely seen. The English were aware of the latest developments on the continent, even if they weren't actually making those changes. These artists travelled a lot, and probably for longer than we did. Because they were all aware, patrons as well as the artists, of what was going on. And the other thing is the dominance still of Rome in the Northern Renaissance, because you hear time and again of the Duras and Van Eycks spending 2-3 years, and this went on for some time, in Rome, but you don't hear them coming north to train at all. Occasionally they came on a visit. The foreign artists, none that were copied, none of them were English. I've just put here the Chinaman, Wu Weishan, who's responsible for Confucius in the Longclair Causeway. It's still going on. We're copying the foreigners here. England was and remained artistically a desert. I'm not talking about writing, I'm not talking about architecture, but in terms of art, very, very much so. And it still goes on today, in my view. I remember in Paris, Sarkozy saying on television, come and see this wonderful Impressionist exhibition. When did you hear one of our leaders say that? Cameron and the rest of them are more concerned with playing tennis or riding a horse. And really, this artistic project, suborned perhaps by the terrible Tudors, is a bit strong, but they certainly used it alongside the biblical references. And I can't think of another artistic project of great art like this that does the same. If you think of the Sistine Chapel, surely it's only biblical. The Scrovegni Giotto frescoes in Padua or in Istanbul, the Cora in the Fields mosaics, they don't have, I think, so many ulterior motives as ours. And I was looking at a map of what's recognised the artistic centres, and I can't give you the source, I'm afraid, but we didn't feature at all, just a couple of places, and all these particularly around northern Europe. So a little message would be to go and search the glass, take your binoculars. I think there's so much to see, from hedgehogs to monarchs' portraits. And it reminds me again of a picture at the Fits, the middle Bruegel, Hell Bruegel, and someone counted that there were 263 men or people here, and it does reward you to go and look and see what they're doing. There are lots of little cameos going on. Reminds me also of kind of, Where's Wally or whatever. And just the other day, I was looking in preparing this, and got excited because I looked at the end and I said, well, he's got 6 toes, isn't he, Jesus? And I looked up there, and there are your 6 toes. So I rushed home to Wikipedia and found a few respectable artists who'd drawn Christ with 6 fingers and what have you. And then rushed off to my retained friend, man of the cloth, Roger G, and he pointed out, well, actually, it's the foot behind. And it probably what it is, to my disappointment. But it's still terribly badly drawn. Look how good the grain is, the knots, and look at the lovely trees and this very odd toe. I just want to tell you also to keep your criticisms of it there, because the George Schaff talks about the worst window, and I tend to go into museums thinking it's all terrific and wouldn't dream of criticising any window. But he has a criticism which I enjoy. First of all, he said all the best paintings are arranged on the south side. Then he says about this window, window 12 on the north side of the end, its perspective is irreparably flat. It is technically inefficient. It's badly fired, injudiciously painted, and of lamentable quality. It suggests a once reputable glazier in his dotage. A Spanish Don meanly suggested in the 1880s, of King's he was, that the birds were not worthy of the cage. And I think that's a very mean comment, and much better is our Abbot Sugier, who started the Basilica of Saint-Denis and triggered Gothic architecture. And he said that even the dullest mind rises to the truth from material things. And this is central to Catholic religion, that is a moving experience to go into these places. It does lift you. And actually, that's what Catholicism, part of it, is about, appealing to the ears through the lovely music and the eyes through the beauty of the place and the taste buds through the wine, even the nose sense through their smells. And I think this is something to remember. I think it's a generous comment. It really does rub off on us. Just a lovely picture of the outside, a comment, if you can read it at the back, an immense and glorious work of fine intelligence from Wordsworth, and lots of lovely pictures of it. And I was just going to give you that and remove it and hope that the lecture objectives have been put in place. It was to put the chapel in the context of our history and expose the inspiration behind the glass paintings, and see it explains so much, and possibly you've been informed and entertained. And I have a tiny epilogue before my microphone is cut off, and much of what I've looked at comes from this great chap, Hilary Waymond, whose wife may be here tonight. And there have been 2 opportunities to look at this glass in detail, 2 major opportunities. One was when we put the glass back in the 1950s, and then again more recently at the end of 1968, when it was reordered. And he was also an expert of tapestries, but much of what he writes in the big book, which I have here, is really informative and lovely writing as well. And the latest book, personally, I find, from King's, celebrating 500 years of the building from 1515, I looked at the glass chapter, and I have to reach for the dictionary every other paragraph because it's difficult to absorb, and his work really isn't. There are 2 other books the late and much lamented Corolla Hicks, who wrote this great book and tells you a lot about the people working on the project. Kings themselves have done a good book with all the pictures there for a tenner from their shop, and there's a mini Waymont. And in that company, I shouldn't really put my book, but I do have something. And I've worked the last couple of days trying to get these letters cut out and these people disciplined. I'd be very happy to sign the book for you if you get an order in a moment and do that. So that is it, and thank you very much for your time.
Well, what a lot we've all learnt. Fantastic lecture, Nick. Absolutely wonderful. I can't think that any of us will go into King's Chapel with the same, as if we'd gone yesterday. If we went tomorrow, it would be completely different. Just fabulous. There's so many things that I'm not going to, at this stage, for a minute, try and recap, just to say thank you so much, Nick, for a fabulous lecture. Very quickly, I just want to reiterate Nick's, the thanks earlier from Gwen to Light Blue Travel for your sponsorship for this lecture, and as a result of which you are all, I hope, going to stay with us to enjoy a glass of wine. Your ticket price did include a glass of wine, so please join us and stay. And then you might have noticed that we left on your seats some cards with information about the Friends of the Fitzwilliam. And I do hope that anybody who is not a friend will take this card away with them and feel inspired to join. And that those of you who are friends will take the card away with you and perhaps hand it to one of your own friends or acquaintance and invite them to join. Because, as you know, the Friends of the Fitzwilliam is about supporting the museum and supporting in particular the acquisitions for the museum and keeping the collection alive. And we do, or it does, rely on our support. So please do continue with your membership of the Friends and encourage your friends and acquaintances to join. And I just wanted to say that Nick has very, very kindly offered to give a free tour of the glass or tour of the chapel to anybody who signs up to the Friends of the Fitzwilliam this evening. So if you would be interested in such a thing and you are not now a friend, please would you write your name and email on a piece of paper that will be on the desk by the front door, and Nick will be in touch to arrange a time. So I think, was there anything else that I was supposed to say? And if my committee can jog my memory. Good. Well, lovely to see you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting the museum. And thank you again to Nick for a fabulous lecture.